another 30 seconds or so, but while we're waiting on folks to join in, anything that folks would like to share, success stories, questions that you have or you're getting from your leadership, those sorts of things? Okay. Hearing none, then we will plow ahead. Our rather consistent pattern is holding. Donations are down and average gift is up, leading to a flat revenue from last year. And so you can see that kind of exists across months. Generally, donation quantity has been down, although often up against previous years. And average gift continues to climb. I thought we might see a cooling off because, starting in August, September of last year, we saw that average gift already starting to come up. But no, it's increasing over its highs. And as we've talked about on previous meetings, as people are spending more on all types of goods, as inflation has increased, they continue to spend more on their charitable donations as well. And because revenue is flat, we know that isn't just the smaller donors falling off of our lists, otherwise revenue would be down. It's actually an increasing in the donations that we have across things. Any questions on that? Okay. And plowing ahead, you've seen recession concerns in a lot of different places. Federal Reserve's economists, there was a survey by KPMG that found that of the big CEOs across large companies, 91% are factoring in a recession over the next 12 months. Only about a third of them think it's going to be a small one. And so they're really worried about kind of the double dipping of recession. And looking at Federal Reserve patterns, you can see these are interest rates, and the gray bars that you'll see there are recessionary periods. And so every time there's been a large spike in interest rates, there's been a recession, whether short or large, with the exception of the increase in interest rates in the mid-90s. And so there's whether this is correlation or causation, or whether this is just other factors are causing both interest rates and recessionary fears to increase. I can't speculate on that. Smarter people than I are at the Federal Reserve. But there's this idea that there can be a soft landing from the increase in interest rates that we've seen. And that hasn't been borne out by the past, that you've had this period of increased interest rates in the past, and it almost invariably results in recession. We, in particular, are not seeing paper prices abating. In fact, they do continue to increase, and a lot of our supplies fall into the same sort of pattern. You saw the drop early on in recession, and now there's this whipsawing, this whiplash effect that has come in, that folks have tried to staff up, get supplies in, and it is starting to catch up, but it isn't going to catch up this year and likely not in early next year. So where does this fear of supply side shock, inflation, recession leave us? And it's in times of inflation and recession are the few times that you have had 2 years in a row where the increase in giving hasn't outpaced the inflation. So a decline in real giving, that is inflation adjusted giving. So we've seen it in mid-70s, you saw it in the early 80s, you saw it in the early 90s. And this graph doesn't show it because Giving USA data doesn't go out this way, but you did see it in association with the Great Recession. So that all sounds really bad, but for what we do in direct marketing, it is certainly not fatal and not likely to be fatal. People tend to give the same portions of their income. In terms of individual giving, the stock market and charitable giving are rather weakly correlated. Major gifts do go down, but the type of charitable giving that we do in the direct marketing sphere isn't all that affected. And this is in large part because people tend to lock in their giving and want to maintain that giving regardless of what time comes in. People are more likely to increase their giving as the stock market goes up, but not to decrease it as they go down because of that mental piggy bank that people have. In fact, it's looking at predictors of charitable giving. The lagged S&P 500 that you'll see here in yellow is actually a better predictor of 0.6 correlation with overall giving than the current S&P 500. People are giving from their previous gains, not their current gains or losses. And in fact, better than the current S&P 500 is consumption expenses. That used to be a bit more of a balm, but retailers are looking at potential consumption, flattening of consumption expenditures. Retail is leveling off, and people are talking about kind of a lull for the holiday purchasing this year, which probably means a flattening out of charitable giving. During these economic times, direct marketing is usually relatively untouched. Our donors tend to be older, they tend to be more mentally budgeted, and people give to feel normal. So major donor corporate foundation giving, probably a little bit more hurt than we are in the charitable giving sector. And we've seen that what we've seen so far in terms of the lull in giving is more of a deflation of the COVID bubble than a reaction to any sort of economic news. Let's take that revenue chart that we looked at earlier and look at just 2019 versus 2022. If you went back 3 years and someone showed you this chart, you'd say, wow, there's been this explosion in giving over the past 3 years. Each month has had, double-digit growth to get there, and usually significant double-digit growth in there. It's only because we had the highs of 2021 that this year looks like, in mail, a bit of a disappointment. So the counsel that we have is not to cut acquisition. When you cut acquisition, you pay the price later. If you cut acquisition for a year, your total donor numbers, if you're looking at generally pretty average retention rates, your total donor numbers won't recover for 4 years. Your multi-year donors, that core donor segment, that's not going to recover for 7 years. And so kind of the overall looking at a recession is a kind of keep calm and carry on. Our mail donations or direct marketing donations are mostly non-cyclical. They don't go up and down as the stock market does, as the economy does. What hurt us in some of those previous times are people pulling back, especially during the Great Recession. You see that the people who continued to invest during that time came out of the recession doing well. Those who didn't are largely causing that drop in individual giving, as well as a loss in some major giving and in some foundation giving. Any questions on any of that? I should give the usual proviso. I'm not an economist, I'm not a futurist, and I definitely am not giving any stock market advice. If you saw my stock market portfolio, you wouldn't want to take it, even if I were. So,
hey, Nick.
Hey,
I do want to throw out a question to you.
Sure.
So we know that small donors are decreasing kind of at a troubling rate, right?
Yep.
So as we look here at year end and going in, knowing this recession potential hanging over us and with the inflation, but do you think that's going to hurt us here at year end?
A little bit. The decline that we're seeing in small donor donations goes back, 20 years. You can see that general slow decline of donations across demographic groups, across ages, across racial ethnic groups, across generations, married versus single, religious versus non-religious. Really, every group has shown decline to giving over that time period, with the exception of the COVID bubble.
Right.
We saw that jump up. We're seeing a deflating of that right now. And so I think we'll continue to see that deflation at year-end giving. And so I would say that kind of looking with that long view, that if you were to compare this year's year-end giving to, say, 3 years ago, it's still going to have this nice jump up but it may look a little worse than last year's did, or flat to last year's. The things that I'd recommend is definitely be looking at your ask strings. The average gift increases that we're seeing online and offline across a couple of different areas are largely unbidden. They are largely unprompted. People are staying with their current ask strings. So imagine if we were adapting our tactics to the terrain. I would also say that investment beyond the current donor file is going to really help at year end. And that goes into some of the digital results that our more digital folks are seeing. We're seeing that overall digital revenue was still up as of Q2, even year over year. But a big part of that isn't email revenue. It isn't coming from our current donors. So you see this drop in Q1 and Q2 of year over year email based. Now this is last touch attribution, which is always a little suspect, but the people who get an email, click through on it, we are seeing that declining. And so the increase that you're seeing is from an increased investment in and a diversification and investment in digital strategies. And so that's going into CTV, that is increasing digital advertising, that's going into, as we'll talk about, some of the underused channels like Bing, like some of the other ad networks that give programmatic digital ad buys that give us a hit them where they ain't approach that allows for this type of growth. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. I would also say that our ad networks are kind of adapting to the current environment by putting more ads and increasing ad inventory to try to, for Facebook, we've seen a waning of their effectiveness as they've lost cross-app tracking, as they've lost some of their cookie-based architecture going to pixel-based architecture. And so it reminds me of the scene in Ready Player One where they say, we can fill 80% of the user's display with advertising before we get to seizures. We're getting to that increasing ad inventory that people are putting in. Facebook and Insta, so the Meta environment, they're really looking at trying to be a TikTok copycat in a lot of cases. So in Facebook, that's Reels. They're testing post-loop ads, short ones coming in. They're doing image carousel ads below Reels. And they're trying to build up that Reels ecosystem by allowing free songs. And many of you who have been in digital marketing for a few years will remember that Facebook got into trouble a few years ago because they wanted to make the shift to video. And so they inflated the metrics that came from video. They essentially wanted to make video happen so much that they lied about it. I think we may see, or if not the perfidy there, the same enthusiasm toward this type of video content, short video content, and toward their push into the metaverse that we'll talk about a little bit later on. Within Facebook targeting, they are creating what they call the Advantage custom audience, which looks a lot like their lookalike audiences. But those who use Facebook know that you have to specify, do you want 1% similarity, 5% similarity, 10% similarity in your lookalike audiences? Advantage custom audiences, they say, you'll be able to sort of set the parameters that you want to achieve, whether that's a cost to acquire, a click-through rate, a cost for some other action, and say, give me everyone that comes up to this level. Now, the trick is for us, that may work well for retailers because Facebook has all the data in the world, except for donation data. And so what we would always counsel is build your audiences outside Facebook, using Simio Cloud or other modeling solutions. Obviously, we would prefer Simio Cloud, but we also recognize that there are a lot of good audience solutions out there, and a combination approach there makes a lot of sense. But building those audiences where you have donation data in addition to other data involved allows you to not spend money on the 50% of people who aren't charitable givers and thus are far less likely to donate to you during this time. So build your audiences externally, bring them into Facebook. If you want to experiment with Advantage Custom Audience, go ahead, but I would remember that it is just a test, and those that are going to be gift-based are going to be a bit more tried and true. Over on Insta, businesses can now play ads in the Explore home. That's the grid that people see when you first go to the Explore tabs. They're also testing ads in the profile feed. And my favorite that gives you this 80% of your thing is there are now multi-advertiser ads. If someone engages with an ad, they'll put ads below the ads that they think you might want. And so if you click on that mattress ads, congratulations, you now get all of the mattress ads. And so it's like it's turtles and ads all the way down on Instagram. They're also looking at augmented reality ads. Those are mostly product demos right now, but it would be interesting to see those organizations that have a lot of video assets and the ability to shoot those sorts of things on location to, you know, if you are building the well, let's have an augmented reality look at what the well looks like. I would say that's years down the road, not months, but it is something that's of interest. Over on Microsoft, they are looking to, and this is very on Microsoft, be very user-friendly in their ads. They know that they are not the leader, and so they are making it very easy to import your Google ads, import your Pinterest campaigns. They've already done Facebook, import those campaigns into Microsoft and run them across their advertiser network. We talked last month about how Firefox has banned URL tracking. Microsoft is now trying to build that into to non-Firefox browsers to be able to see how your ad works through a digital ecosystem through URL tracking. Won't work on Firefox, will still work in Chrome. And then Google is trying to make its tags audiences a little bit easier to use. My favorite among these is CMS integration, so that you can build it in to your site without having to use code, which is great. But the tag coverage summary is great as well, because you can put in a series of URLs, in fact, upload them in a CSV file and say, are tags properly managed on this page? So you don't have those dead zones. I know I used to get tag dead zones when I crossed over from a native CMS for the website to the donation page to the action page that at the time for me was hosted through what was then Convio, is now Blackbaud. But that transition can always be a little bit challenging. And so making sure you have tags placed in both places, very helpful to be able to do that. So one of the things that I think you're seeing with Microsoft here is that the digital ad duopoly that was just Meta and Google is showing some cracks in the armor. And so it's time to play the Family Feud on this. So I've given you the two ad networks here, and I mentioned that we had Microsoft coming up closely behind. What are the others that you see in the environment? And the numbers here are billions spent. So shout them out, put them in the chat, however you'd like to interact here. What networks are you seeing as? Everyone's on mute. Everyone's doing other things. So shout them out in the chat. Unmute. Who do we have that are the other ad networks that people are spending on? Any guesses? Okay. So not a chatty crowd today. We'll just go through it. Amazon is in number 3 spot. We have in the number 4 spot, TikTok is already number 5 and growing. Apple, believe it or not, is number 4, coming in at $4 billion. And then you have Snapchat and Twitter with $3 billion each. You may look at this and say, Twitter, you know, if they have $3 billion in ad revenue, why is someone spending $44 billion to acquire them? That's a good question. One that I don't have an answer to. The big part of this is that Meta and Google used to 4 years ago be 80+% of this. And so there's $100 billion in ad spend that has come in that has basically come out of nowhere. So it's like TikTok and Amazon and Microsoft and Apple showed up out of nowhere. And there are some advantages that these new players have. Amazon and Apple can use first-party data for their ads. Microsoft can use Bing to tune their LinkedIn ads and vice versa. And TikTok, of course, has its own relevancy algorithm. And so the privacy regulations that you're seeing against third-party data hurt Google and Meta far more than some of these new places. I will say that we are seeing some clients that are doing better in Bing for some months than in Google. And it's just because the ad costs are much lower. And so there's this ability to shift your investment to where people aren't spending it right now. So the kind of oversimplification here is that it used to be Google was all search, Facebook was all display. You now have Amazon that's playing in the search commerce market. You have Apple that's playing in the search apps market. And you have TikTok that's a big player in the display commerce market. I would anticipate that you may have Twitter and Snapchat falling off of those rankings in the years to come. Walmart is making a bid for an ad business. They're at $2 billion right now. Be Real is an interesting network that's, I think it's number 7 or 8 in App Store downloads recently. And so that's coming up behind. And so you're not going to see perhaps the same duopoly that you've seen in the past. Any questions on that before we go into potpourri? Okay. I have a weird bit of good news. Too little sleep makes people less generous. This is actually 3 studies for the price of one. They looked at how humans interact. One was in an MRI machine. But my favorite one, I'm supposed to favor the MRI machine because of our neuro fundraising lab and all of the research that we did there. And there is some fascinating stuff in this study about the brain regions that activated. But there's a simple way that they looked at it. And I've seen this, I used to work at Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And so there were studies that showed that crashes go up on when you skip forward in daylight savings time because people lose an hour of sleep. Sure enough, people become less charitable the day after daylight savings time. And in fact, you can see the daily donation still shows an impact 3 days later. And I'm gesturing with a mouse that you can't see. There you go. 3 days later, you still see an impact on charitable giving because people haven't had that sleep. There's a non-significant increase when you go back to standard time. And my hypothesis is that because you don't gain necessarily an hour of sleep when you go back to standard time, if you're like me, because of kids. Kids don't care when the clock is, they get up when their internal clock goes off. So why is this good news? Because Americans are getting more sleep. And so hope this alone, certainly not enough to arrest the decline that we're seeing in donor behavior, but it is a good sign. As Americans get more sleep, hopefully we will also get more generous. Now, I talked about Facebook and Meta earlier, and I don't feel like I made enough fun of them like I tend to, and so let's highlight them a little bit and say, so they're working on the Horizon Worlds, which is Meta's entrance into virtual reality, and you saw Mark Zuckerberg and his Polar Express Dead Eyes face demoing this. But even the folks that are building the product are reluctant to use it. So Facebook has been sending out directives, trying to get the people who build the stuff to use the stuff, which is not usually a good sign for product innovation. So don't start those VR budgets for Facebook just yet. Last month, for those who attended, you saw that I said sometimes it's the person you expect most who commits the crime, not the person who you expect the least. There I showed someone with devil horns impaled and half of his face tattooed like a reptile. here's another example of where the signs are really all there for a criminal. So shocker, the go-to expert on money laundering was arrested for laundering money. How did he acquire this expertise, you may ask? So this is a stretch of highway in the forest in Oregon. Back in 2011, when they were planting the forest, the lumber company planted some deciduous trees, the ones that the leaves fall out of, among their evergreens. And so now in the forest, there is a smiley face every fall. For those who like data and want to go trick-or-treating, remember that there's also trick and treating, trick nor treating, and those sorts of things. And then finally, there's a case that went to the Supreme Court about whether parody is allowable to be punishable by law. And so The Onion actually submitted an amicus brief where they talked about how they began in the 1700s, how they have 4.3 trillion visitors, how they consulted with Syria and Somalia and the former Soviet Union, and all of these things, a parody brief within a serious brief about how parody needs to be protected. So it's worth a laugh, it's worth a thought, all of that available at the Supreme Court case. Then finally, a tease of our upcoming education. We don't have anything that you can sign up for right now, but watch your emails. Sometime in October, we're going to do a webinar about multicultural outreach focused on the Hispanic market from some of our internal experts. We're going to be working a lot of what we've talked about with the economy. We're going to be working on a webinar on that for November 15th or thereabouts to talk through the entire sector and really try to lay out, here's where the economic times look like they're going. Here's our projection for 2023 and try to show the way forward there. We'll also be working on white papers for the Hispanic market, for neuro fundraising, for influencers, and then working for 2023, we'll be talking more about influencer marketing in webinars and get out some CTV content. If there are webinars or white papers or that type of content that you want to be seeing, please let us know, because we want to, we love putting out the stuff that we already know about, but even better than that, if we can be satisfying a demand in the market, the things that you have, the burning questions that you have, we want to be doing that even more. Any questions on any of that? Any comments, things that you're seeing for your organizations? Okay, well, thank you very much for your time on this Wednesday, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Feel free to shout out any questions as you have them. You can always reach me at nellinger@wearemore.com, or I'm on LinkedIn spouting off about stuff fairly frequently.